that I have this Facebook page brought up, so when it goes live over here, I can mute it, and then we'll wait for the Blog Talk Radio lady to give us the countdown. All right, let me.
Your
There we
show
go.
will go live in 5, 4. No, I'm joking.
Stop it.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Sunday to you. This is another edition of the Crossing the Crescent discussion group, as we call it here on the YouTube stream and the Facebook streams. And also we call it the Real Interfaith Dialogue over on Blog Talk Radio and the Global Patriot Radio Network. Today we're going to kind of step away from the beaten path of examining Islamic issues and how Islamic issues relate to Christianity and how Christian issues relate to Islam. Today we're going to do something unique, and this is our friend George Borg's idea, one of his ideas anyway, and I see he hasn't made it yet. But it's on the Shroud of Turin. And the Shroud of Turin is one of these topics that people have an interest in, but they really don't know a lot about. You know, they know that, okay, it's supposed to be the burial cloth of Christ. You talk to somebody that has a little bit greater knowledge, you say, well, there was a study in the late 80s that demonstrated that it was a fake because of the carbon-14 dating, dated it to the Middle Ages, and that's about it. So what I want to do today is I want to take about the first 20 minutes of the show, and I want to go through what the shroud is, what it represents, and why I personally, this is me personally, I'm not speaking for everybody here that comes to this show, but I personally believe that the Shroud of Turin is in fact the burial cloth of Christ. And I believe that this shroud is exactly what we would expect our God to do, is to give us something or leave us something concrete that says, yes, I am God, I am Lord over your life, and look, this is what I've done for you, and I've given you physical proof that has been preserved for 2,000 years now. Well, not quite 2,000 years, I guess you'd say. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the shroud is to begin with. The shroud is thought to be the burial cloth of Christ. Now, what am I doing here? I got all kinds of different... There we go. It's thought to be the burial cloth of Christ, the cloth that Christ was wrapped up into when he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea in his grave after his crucifixion. And here's the key thing as it relates to Islam. In order to be buried in a shroud, in order to be buried, you first have to be dead. So when we start talking about, was Christ crucified? Did Christ die on a cross? If the shroud is true, then we know for a fact that if the shroud is in fact the burial cloth of Christ, we know for a fact that Jesus died. And one of the greatest evidences for the death of Christ is the empty tomb. There wasn't anybody alive at the time, and we don't have any written record of anybody denying that the tomb was empty. And we can find this information in the Bible. If we go to the Gospel of John, we know that Jesus was buried in this linen. And the reason why, I want to get the pointer out here. Let me get the pointer here. I always feel empowered when I got the pointer. When we look here, it says that, so Peter and the other disciple, I wasn't supposed to do this. This was supposed to be, I didn't save this. Anyway, Peter and the other disciple were running and reached the tomb. He bent over and looked, and the strips of linen, this is the key word right here, linen lying there but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came in behind him and straight into the tomb and saw the strips of linen. I promise you that I had changed these around this morning, and evidently I didn't save. I saved them to my thumb drive, and I was supposed to put this first. So when he found out from the Turin, he granted the body to Joseph. I was told in the feedback that I asked for last night, he goes, "You're going to want to mention first that Joseph of Arimathea was given the body instead of Peter and John running out there." But anyway, Joseph of Arimathea is given the body, and then he bought fine linen and took him down, wrapped it in the linen, and laid him in the tomb, which had been hewn out of the rock. Then this Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate. This is Luke now instead of Mark. This is now in Luke. And it says that then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in the tomb. And then Peter and Luke goes on to talk about how Peter and John ran to the tomb after being alerted that Jesus wasn't there. And again, they saw linen clothes by themselves. So when we look at the biblical evidence for this, if we look at the New Testament testimony of a shroud existing or something like that existing, we have it right here in 3 of the 4 Gospels. When we look at the Shroud of Turin has been said to be the most studied artifact in the history of the world, and I would think so. If it is the burial garment of God himself, God incarnate, people would want to look at it. And this is what it looks like if you took a picture of it. And this is what kind of startled the world. I believe there was the first picture taken of it that was developed as a negative was from an Italian photographer. I think it was in the last century, or the 1890s, something or other. When he got this back, he was astonished to see this instead of just seeing this. Here you can tell there's a faint image on this piece of cloth, but when you took a picture of it, this is what he saw, and he was absolutely amazed. And this is what the shroud is. It's a negative image, or the equivalent of a negative image of a photograph. There's images. This image is on the front of the shroud and the back of the shroud. Now, I don't know if, let me do this. I'm not doing this to be a hog. Okay, so let's imagine that you have the shroud itself. The top of my hand is let's do it. No, I can't do it that way. The top of my hand is the shroud, and you would lay a body on there, and then they would fold the shroud on top of the body. So on the inside, there's an image of the front, and then on the back side, there's an image of the back side, or the back image of a person there. The shroud it's amazing in that the detail that you can see of the face there. And we're going to be talking about the eyes and how there was coins on the eyes here in a little bit. Hi, Steve. How are you today?
Good, man.
Let's have you make it. And then this is what the shroud is made out of. It's made out of flax, and it has a special type of weave in it. It's called a herringbone weave. It's 3/1. I'm not exactly sure what all that entails, but from what I understand, it's a very unique way of weaving cloth. And it measures about 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. And the stitching itself, this type of stitching was not used in Europe. There hasn't been any indication that this garments have been discovered in Europe during the Middle Ages when this thing was supposedly created. They don't have it. They do have something that they discovered in Masada, which is southeast of Jerusalem, about 40 miles. This is where you had the Jewish revolt, and it was where they held out on this big tall mountain. Well, it's not that tall of a mountain. It's a mountain. It's kind of like a plateau. You can't get to it. But when they went to excavate it, they found linen there that had the same type of 3/1 herringbone weave. I should have put this back up here. So here, let me put this up here. There we go. So this type of weave right here. Now, this picture right here depicts this weave, and I'm going to explain to you here in a little bit why that is important. And if you look at the fibers on here, the shroud is marked not on the thread, but just the very outside fibers. So if you look at the flax here, it's just like the first 2 or 3 layers of the flax fibers are scorched. It does not seep into the entire thread itself, which is amazing in and of itself. Okay, next one. The marks exist only on. Okay, I was getting ahead of myself. They did not penetrate the thread itself. They're only on the outside or the fibers that were close to the person that it covered. And if you look at the shroud itself, it gives you every indication that the person that it covered was crucified, essentially using the same means and methods that Christ was crucified with. You have facial injuries there that are apparent. You have blood stains all over the place, even on the head where the crown of thorns was. You have blurred injuries on the back, on the shoulders from carrying a heavy object, which suggested he carried a heavy object. I don't know what that would have been, maybe a cross. An elliptical wound is visible on the right side of the chest, indicating that this person was stabbed. The bones of the legs are not broken. People who were crucified on crosses, more often than not, their legs were broken. And the reason for breaking the legs is that when you are crucified, you normally die from asphyxiation. And the asphyxiation is from the weight of your arms holding your body. You would have to pull up in order to exhale. And a lot of times they would push up with their legs. Well, if you can't push up with your legs because your legs are broke and your ankles are shattered like they would do. This is why they did it to the two thieves that were on the cross with Christ, is they wanted them to die quickly, so they broke their legs. Well, they didn't break Christ's legs because they knew he was already dead. And this person, even though he was had been crucified, did not have his legs broken. The knees looked like they were had fallen on them continuously. You have the wrist and puncture wounds in the wrists here and down here in the feet. And then you have extensive wounds across the body, indicating that this person had been excessively scourged. So this is what the evidence from the shroud itself gives us. I put 233. I might be off on that number. I read an article and I thought that was the number that I read, but I might be wrong on that. But you have let's just put it this way. You have in excess of over 200 wound marks on the shroud, indicating that this person had been scourged. And when you look at how the Romans scourged people using the cat of nine tails, this is exactly what you would expect to find. And you find it on both the front and the back. And if you've ever seen The Passion of the Christ and watched that scourging scene, that is one of the most, from what I've been told, one of the most accurate depictions of how Christ was scourged. You also have, of course, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing here. Of course, the wounds on the wrist, the feet, and the side that indicate that he was crucified and then was killed with or was ensured that he was died by thrusting the spear into his side. And then, of course, you have the wounds on the head, indicating that this person had the crown of thorns, the crown of thorns. I'm going too fast. Okay, so that's what the shroud is, and that's what it tells us itself. Now, there's outside evidence indicating that the shroud is a historical figure. Me being a historian, I teach history. This is what I do, and this is where it's easiest for me to understand if something is legitimately is legitimate or not. So when we look at the shroud, we go clear back to the 1st century, and you have, okay, let me see here. Somebody's mic is hot. I'm going to mute. Let's see, mute there. And then, if you guys want to come on, all you have to do is just unmute yourself and come on. I don't have a problem with you doing that. I'm just trying to get the noise down. King Agar writes in the 1st century that he says that Jesus was given a towel, and he probably misunderstood this. He's given a towel, and by wiping his face on the towel, the image was put on this towel itself. And we know for sure that this king existed because we have a coin that date back to the 1st century. You jump ahead in the ecclesiastical histories. Here you have the people of Edessa were believed to be in possession of a image of divine origin that allowed them to stop a siege coming into Edessa and destroy a siege mound. Now, whether or not like the Jews used to carry the ark out in front of them when they would go into battle, and the ark gave them the ability to win the battle. Whether or not the shroud enabled to do this for them is really not what we're focusing on here. What I'm focusing on here is that the shroud existed, and they thought this is what it had done. That's the main point that I'm trying to make there. And then if you get to the Apostle Thaddeus in the 6th century, he called the cloth tetrapylon, and that means it's doubled in 4. It has 4 folds in it. You never guess how many folds the shroud has in it. Exactly. And there's only 2 times that this exists in historical text, and it refers to this image found on this cloth that is in Edessa. Then you go to 943, the Byzantine Emperor Romulus the First mentions this, that they took the image, take the image of Edessa, which was the burial cloth of Christ. So that's mentioned there in 943. And then it goes to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. And when it arrives there, the emperor, Constantine, and 2 of his brothers-in-law go to see it. It's written down that they went to do this. And this was confirmed. This was confirmed by a monk who was writing about Constantine going to see the shroud himself. So you have all kinds of written evidence for the existence of the shroud prior to 1230, which the carbon dates from the late 80s indicate as earliest that it could have existed. Then you have Constantine again mentioning it, the sacred linens, the Sindon, which is the shroud. Then you have in 1201, you have a relic collection. The Catholic Church was known for collecting relics, having relics. It was kind of a pride thing for a lot of people. And they would do inventories of the relics. And when they did an inventory of the imperial collection in Constantinople, the shroud was one of those things that they had listed in their inventory. So if you list it in your inventory, that generally indicates that you have it. And then we have, after that, you have the French Crusader, Robert de Clary, wrote about the shroud and said that it was displayed every Friday up till 1204. Now, he wrote this after 1204, but he was writing that up to 1204 that this was displayed. Then you have the evidence in art. And what I mentioned, this picture here, this picture is taken from a Hungarian prayer manuscript that is dated back to the 12th century. This is right on, this is about 100 years, I guess, after the Crusades. And this bottom part here gives you a picture of the herringbone weave that is mentioned. That's the type of weave that the linen has, is that 3/1 herringbone weave. And that is what's pictured right here. So you have a prayer manuscript dated prior to 1230, the earliest that it possibly could have come into existence, showing that the shroud existed, or something like the shroud existed. And then the art evidence, I'm not going to go into it exactly, but the pictures, the way that Christ was depicted is very consistent with what we see on the shroud, the way that his beard appears, the way that his hair is parted down the middle. And there's other indicators there. So if you look at the evidence of the art that existed and was developed, it was based on what Christ looked like as depicted on the shroud. And then there's the science. Of course, the carbon-14 dates from 1988. They give a date of 1260 to 1390 AD. And they took the sample that they took in order to carbon date it. They carbon dated it in using AMS, accelerated mass spectrometry, in 3 different labs. And all 3 of these labs came back with dates that are consistent with what they have right there. It was taken from the corner. Now, when you took it, the reason where if you take it from the corner, they took it from a very place where there would be the most wear and tear on the shroud. If you go to pick up the shroud to display it to somebody, you're going to hold it by the corners. Well, if you continually do that over the years, those corners would become very worn, and they could be very susceptible to recent carbon contamination. Could be. I'm not saying that was the reason why, but it could be. But they've recently discovered that the shroud was repaired the shroud was repaired, and they had new fibers woven into the threads there that in those corners that was repaired. So if you weave recent carbon fibers into the shroud to repair it, let's say just pick a date. Let's say you were repairing it around 1300 AD. Well, and that's what you're testing. That's the dates that you are going to get, because the radiocarbon 14 dates carbon-14, which is a radioactive isotope. It decays down into not carbon-12. I think it's nitrogen-14. It doesn't matter. It decays into what they call a daughter element. And if you take that ratio, that will give you a date. Well, if it's a more recent carbon, that ratio is not going to be as great. So therefore, your age is going to be a lot less than what it would normally be. So this is been called into question. The only evidence, here's what I'm saying. The only evidence against the shroud that we have has been discredited. That's the point I'm trying to make here. And then we had earlier dates that were done privately that in 1982 that date the shroud all the way back to when it was supposedly Christ's crucifixion occurred. Okay, I keep getting Rad. Nancy was.
Yeah, she's having trouble.
Having heart problems.
Yeah, she's in Uganda, so.
Okay. When we get done during the presentation, I'll let her come on, and we'll take care of that. I saw the message that you sent me.
All right,
We'll do that today, though. If you want to message her and let her know that, we'll get her on at the end.
All right, I'll let her know.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Then you have different other types of testings. Now I have no idea what this lignin test was. I was trying to read it and try to understand it, but evidently it's a decay of biological material, and you should have X number or X amount of the decay material there. And by using this type of test, it dates the shroud to 1300 to 3000 years old, which is well past the carbon-14 testing dates as provided by that I don't know what you call them, that group in 1988. Then you have this type of spectro. I can't pronounce it. I'll get it out. But anyway, you have these other types that have dated the shroud to 33 BC plus or minus 250 years. So you have other dating methods that have been used to date the shroud. It's just that the carbon-14 method dates are the ones that are always used. You have blood evidence of the shroud. The type of blood is AB positive, which only 3% of the population of the world is AB positive. Then you also have the Sodarium Christi, which is the face cloth that was given that Christ wore after his crucifixion. Now, this face cloth was like if here's the easiest way to explain it. If somebody's in a traffic accident, they're thrown from the car and they died, are we just going to allow that dead body while they're doing the investigation just lay there in the street? No, you're going to cover it up. You're going to put a sheet over it or something like this. When they would do the same thing with the bodies after they were crucified, they'd put a sheet over the top of their face so the families or the people wouldn't have to look into the person's eyes because the eyes stay open. Sardarium, not Sidarium. What the heck is it? Okay, I must have messed it up, guy. I'm sorry. It's decay of the vanillin and lignin. Okay, so it's the daughter element of the lignin is what Guy has this here. I'm thinking I'm getting that right. Okay, let's keep going on here, and then the face cloth dates to 570. We have a audit trail all the way back to 570. I believe it is in Spain today. It's being maintained in Spain today. And then we have dirt around the feet of the person that was inside the shroud. The thing with the dirt is that it's from type of limestone that's only found in Israel today, which seems spot on. Okay, and what else we got here? Pollens. You got 22 different pollens that are indigenous to Constantinople, which is perfectly consistent with the history of the shroud, that it went from Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople, and then it went to France, if I'm not mistaken, for several years, and then it went to Turin, Italy. But the pollens that were found on here indicate that it was in Jerusalem, and we have 7 different pollens that are common plants only in Jerusalem found on the shroud, and 22 of them that are indigenous to and unique to Constantinople. It doesn't mean that they don't exist outside of Constantinople. It's just that they're unique there. And then you have these coins that were placed on Christ's eye, or the person's eye. And the thing about these these coins is that I think there's 70 or 80 different points of congruence between the coins that existed at the time to what we find on the shroud. I would have to reread that. But the thing is that the coins, they misspell Tiberius Caesar's name incorrectly. And that's what we find on the coin. It's spelled incorrectly. And they found 6 or 7, I think it was a video that Gary Habermas made that suggested that there were 6 or 7 other coins that they have found with the same that were minted with the same misspelling. Instead of having a K, they put a C, or instead of having a C, they put a K, or vice versa. I can't remember which one it was. But that really narrows it down right there. And then there is this, the VP8 analyzer. Now, this type of evidence is absolutely amazing. And I know for a fact, the majority of you, how long we've been going here, the majority of you are already sick and tired to listen to me run my yip. So luckily, I had a lady from, I think Janice is in Florida. Janice Winchester's her name, and she's presented evidence from the VP8 imagery, and she contacted me last night via email. I'm going to unmute you, Janice, and asked to come on to present her findings using the VP8 analyzer. Now, she's going to explain to you what a VP8 is and what it does, and how this analysis of the shroud using this instrument that wasn't developed, oh, by the way, at all to demonstrate the veracity of the shroud, but just happens to do that. So Janice, can you hear me, ma'am?
I can. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here, somebody that actually knows what they're talking about. And we always appreciate that on this show, in all complete candor. So Janice, can you tell us what the VP8 analyzer is and what the imagery that we see there, what it represents?
Yes, I am so excited about this. And that's why when I saw you had a program today, I wanted to know what you were going to discuss, and didn't know that I would be here presenting, but I'm very pleased. And the VP8 image analyzer was developed primarily for use in outer space work like the moon, or someone mentioned earlier X-rays. They thought it would work for that also. And this was in the 70s that it was invented. And then it happened to be shown to John Jackson, Dr. John Jackson, out at the Air Force Academy. And he thought about putting the Shroud of Turin photograph on the VP8. And I say on the VP8, how it is imaged in is that a photograph of the shroud is imaged by using a live video that then is transmitted to the VP8, to the oscilloscope. The oscilloscope has XYZ capability, and this is then shown on the display monitor of the oscilloscope. So it shows something that no other photograph can show. And I did experimental work using different photographs, different images, like you mentioned the Shroud of Oviedo, the Sudarium, and none of that, even a live person, does not show the proportion like the photograph that shows up on the oscilloscope display screen. Now you ask, how is that possible? It's because in the oscilloscope with the X, Y, Z axis, it shows the height, the width, and the depth. So what you're seeing on this particular photograph here, this image on the PowerPoint, you can see the highs and lows of the grayscale from the photograph. So this takes the image of the shroud along with other embedded items on the linen and gives a complete rendering of the photograph in detail of the 3D. So when they saw this in the 70s, late 70s, they were just astounded. And they spoke to all of their science friends, high-level science, and everyone wondered, how did the image appear on the linen? What happened? They were so enthused, and at the time, the shroud was owned by the House of Savoy. So they then wanted to know if they could go and look at it. So they were there for a week. And if you go on the website, shroud.com, you'll see a whole big truck with all these boxes of microscopes, SEM, everything you can think of, mass spec, whatever. And so they unloaded all of this in the castle area. Well, if you hear Barry Schwartz talk, he says there was only one bathroom and they needed water for some of the equipment, scientific instruments. So that's what they had to do. And they worked nonstop. Before they went over, they had a plan on how to use all these instruments and who would do what, when, where. And so when they finished, they were still perplexed. How did this get on this piece of linen? So they came back, they wrote up their reports, which are listed on the shroud.com, and they were still perplexed. And then came the carbon-14 dating, which in effect pretty well stopped all of the science that had been so actively going on. And now we know that the carbon-14 tests were irregular, to say a nice word. And then we can now go back and look and see what happened. And so that's going on now. And Tristan Casabianca has several papers showing the mathematical statements as to why it's not true, the carbon-14. And as you mentioned earlier, Joe Marino and Sue Benford, they had found that there were different threads in the, right. Yes, I've seen the Sudarium in person up close. It's really interesting. So he and his wife then determined that there were extra added threads.
Okay, hold on just a second, Janice. You're saying it was Joe. Okay, let me make sure I get this right. It was Joe and his wife that took this evidence to, what was that guy's name? Robert Ray, is that his name? That he worked on the Shroud team and then analyzed it and discovered.
Yeah.
Is that Joe? This Joe that's in our chat right now?
Well, hi, Joe. I don't know if you're in the chat, but
he is. I don't know. Maybe it's somebody impersonating Joe Marino here.
Well, it was Joe Marino's email. That's how I saw that you were on today.
Oh, okay. No, but I mean, you're saying is Joe and his wife are the ones that discovered these threads by using the pictures from the micro. Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure of that.
Yes, it's so phenomenal. And then the science started back up again, and now we have more science about the carbon-14 that we can say that's not accurate. So all of that to say that the people in the early STURP shroud examination of the shroud in Turin, the reason they went was the VP8 image analyzer. It's the first scientific instrument used on the shroud. So fast forward, my experiments prove that what they saw in the 70s is the same as you can see today. And I use 3 different VP8 image analyzers and oscilloscopes. So basically, that's what I can say about the VP8 image analyzer, that it is awesome. There's no other photograph that will make this true portrait-like image.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Okay, so if they put this on the shroud, I mean, let's say a shroud is not a picture. It's not what we would think of would be a normal picture, a normal photograph, and it provides a 3D image anyway. So what happens if they would just take a picture of my pretty little face and they would put it on the VP8? Would you still get the same type of imagery?
Right, and it's from you can either be will be way skewed, like your nose might be above your eyes. It'll be skewed because it doesn't come out X, Y, Z on a graph and then translated to a picture. So it will not show anything like what you look like. And if it's a photograph of you, it still won't be to the proportion that the image of the man of the shroud is. So basically, this is the only photograph that does this. It's the only one. And so you can now see similarities using Photoshop or any of the other programs out there now that convert the photograph to a 3D image. And with the Shroud of Turin, it's the only one that shows this exact proportion portrait of the man of the shroud. No other photograph will show this.
Okay, so the imagery that was gained from the VP8 analyzer is what caused these professors at the Air Force Academy to say, hey, there's something about the Shroud of Turin. We need to do more investigation of this. Now, my understanding of the VP8 was originally developed to do bomb damage assessment. Is there any truth to that at all?
Well, they don't list that, but yes, I've heard that.
Okay.
That what it shows is this a type of force of energy.
Okay. So the VP8 caused these guys to do this, to want and go and investigate the shroud more. And in the process of this is where they came up with these carbon-14 dates that, and I'll be honest with you, I remember when these dates were published, I wasn't devastated. I didn't lose my faith in Christ at the time, but I was like, you know what, that kind of stinks, because this shroud is, it's really, really cool. And
to say about what you're talking about, in the 80s, when these 3 labs listed their findings, Joe Marino now has like a 600-page book. I have it here, talking about all of this, about the shroud and about the testing. So he's truly an expert on it. And but yes, so that's how I got involved in the VP8 analyzer. I met a shroud researcher, and he allowed me to use his VP8. And then I borrowed a VP8. And then I went out to meet with Pete Schumacher. And that's where Andy Weiss also at that museum. So I used their VP8 also, and oscilloscope.
Okay, now I want everybody to know that Janice isn't somebody that just stalks people because they have neat testing equipment. Janet, she has a very special skill set. Can you tell us what you do did in your real life, Janice? Can you explain to everybody why you were using or had encountered this type of technology?
Well, for my work, I was a forensic scientist. I'm since retired, but when I started studying the shroud, I've known the shroud all along, but intensely from the St. Louis shroud conference, that's how I ended up delving into the shroud. And so
Okay, when was that conference, the one in St. Louis?
that was, I think, 2014.
2014, okay.
If Joe's on, he could say exactly. I think it was 2014.
And how often do they have these conferences on the shroud? I've never heard of these things until Friday, where that, who was that? Andy out of New Mexico emailed me. And we're going to have Andy on here next week, as a matter of fact. And Joe, we might have Joe on too, if Joe wouldn't mind coming on. He's posting a lot of things here in the chat. Let's see, 800. Now, did Joe write this book, this 800-page?
Oh, 800. I'm sorry, Joe. I haven't done the whole book yet.
My goodness, how can you write 800 pages on anything for? I guess Habermas is writing a book that's 5,000 pages on the resurrection. But is Joe the author? Let me a stunning expose.
Yes, he is.
All right, let's see a stunning expose. I'm gonna have to look that thing up. Expose, and then I'll have to mail it to Joe so he can sign it for me. Okay, so let's see. First time I know about the Shroud of Turin is from. Now I'm just going to be honest with everybody. I was able to see the Shroud myself when I was in the Army. I was stationed in Italy from 1998 to 2001, and one of the things that I was in a NATO unit. I'm just going to be perfectly honest. NATO, I mean, it was like a 3-year vacation. It was the only vacation I ever had in the Army. It was an easy job, and I could travel a lot. And they were rolling the Shroud out at the turn of the millennium. This is 2000, and my family and I were able to go to Turin, which is clear up in the other corner of Italy. But we were able to go up there and see the Shroud firsthand. And to be honest with you, when you look at the Shroud, if you're just looking at the Shroud, it's really not that impressive. And I don't mean to minimize the word impressive, but it really isn't, because what you're looking at, and I showed the photo at the beginning of the show, that's what you see. You don't get to see the negative image that photographer took in 1898. You see the linen, you see the cloth, and the cloth really isn't. It really isn't all that spectacular. But the idea that is the shroud that covered our Lord and Savior's body after the crucifixion, and you're being that close to it, it's just absolutely amazing. And I did not know as much about the shroud at the time as I do now. I'm not an expert. I could not write an 8-page book, let alone an 800-page book on the Shroud. But what I do know about the Shroud is that it provides us the type of evidence, and as I said this at the beginning of the show, the type of evidence that God would want us to have to demonstrate his awesome power. Because those marks that are made on the Shroud itself, on the inside, only go to the first 2 or 3 fibers deep. They don't go all the way through the thread. It's only on the very outside, and it's like this huge. Oh, that's right. I got this picture here. John Isaac sent me a picture last night that I thought I had lost, but he straightened me out. Okay, I have the conclusions right here. But this picture right here that you see, I got to put this up on the screen. I don't have it on the screen. There we go. This picture right here is an image of somebody that is scorched into the cement. Now, this picture was taken at Hiroshima in Japan after they set off a nuclear bomb above their head. And it caused this negative image to appear on the ground. Now, if you think of the amount of energy necessary to produce a negative image like that, and then compare that to what we have here, and compare that to what we have here on the Shroud itself. I'm sorry, I got to go all the way back now. Sorry. To have this, to think the amount of energy that would be necessary in order to cause that. And it also it transcends space within the shroud itself, because the legs of Christ were in a semi-state of rigor mortis when they buried him. So his legs were sticking up or slightly bent at the knee, so you couldn't, and then the head was bent slightly forward for if this person had died on the cross. And let me put myself up here on the screen. If you die on the cross, your head's going to fall down like this, and then when rigor mortis sets in and your body is brought back, your head's still going to be slanted forward. So the head's slanted forward and the legs are slanted forward, but the image is throughout the entire shroud, is throughout the entire body. So even those where they had spaces between the chest or the neck and the cloth, and then the legs and the abdomen and the feet, there's still an image there, and that's one of the things that just makes this whole thing just so spectacular. Okay, Janice, I was going to ask you another question about the VP8 analyzer. Now, this analyzer that you had, were you able to analyze pictures of the shroud, or no? You're just going off of the research that people had conducted with it?
Well, you're right. I had a photograph of the shroud, and I imaged it in, and then used the knobs on the oscilloscope and the VP8, because you can tilt and rotate the VP8. For, like you see here, is on a slant. So I actually used all three, that's 6 items of scientific equipment, and they all showed the same thing that was proven back in 1977-78 with the STIRP group. So nothing has changed over those years. Still the same ability to show a portrait of the man of the shroud. And you were talking about the radiation, and this burst of energy, if you can imagine, came from the top of the head to the toes. So from, like you were talking about the shroud fabric folded, that's radiation going upward and downward straight. Upward and downward to make that image. So what it shows is that there's a spattering, you might say, and encoded within the linen is what you're seeing. Because you're getting the depth and the height like you were talking about.
Okay, why don't we just reproduce something like this today? Why don't scientists just say, okay, we know this is something that we could do. Why don't scientists just go out and do this? Just make another one.
Make another shroud?
Right.
Well, people have tried to do that, and like they might be able to do it for part of the shroud, like various different ways of using a laser or burning an iron image or any of those things to put it on the cloth, but you can't do the entire body. So it's impossible nowadays.
Okay, well, do we have the technology to produce something like this today?
No, they just tried it in Italy, and they didn't have enough power of the laser to make it. I'm using the word scorch, the little fibrils of each of the fibers. So they weren't able to do it.
And I was when I was doing some further reading this week on this, that was one of the words that kept coming up. It's that they're not scorch marks, but they're scorch-like marks. They were being very careful in their verbiage and the way that they describe that. And the point that I'm trying to focus here is that, okay, if you're going to say this is a medieval forgery, like majority of the critics do, okay, if it's a medieval forgery, then just go ahead and just tell us how it was made. And this is when I was, discussing the creation evolution debate, and I was heavily engaged in that. I was, you would say that, life evolved from, a single-celled organism all the way up to all extent species that we have today. And I'm like, well, how did that life get here? How do you get inorganic material to turn into a self-replicating cell? Well, we don't know. Well, if you can't do it today, why are you saying that it happened sometime in the past? If you can't replicate what is going on today, how can you say that this is a forgery if you don't know the processes in it? And I'm not saying that means that just because we can't self-replicate the shroud today makes it a divinely created artifact, but it does give pretty good evidence to say that this is a process that is unbeknownst to us today, despite the fact that this is the most studied artifact in the world, but yet we still can't figure out how that image got on the shroud itself. Okay.
So right on that. Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you are correct. We can't figure it out today. And that's why it's still the same question of the man of the shroud. Who do you say I am? Do you say that you are Jesus of Nazareth or someone else? But if you look at that as a document, you can go back and see all of the markings and find it in the literature, the Bible, the scriptures of that time period, and see that the exact markings are there. So to reproduce that, we know it's not a painting. We know that it wasn't done in any other type of medium. We just see what it is today and still question, how did it get there? But we know that it's a burst of as radiation.
And we just don't know the origin of the burst of.
Came from
you and I probably know the source of the burst of the energy, but we cannot demonstrate what that source was empirically anyway.
That's as I understand it today.
Okay. Yeah, I've come up with a lot of conclusions. I want to go through the conclusions real quick, and then we'll open it up to anybody that wants to come in and ask a question. I don't know if Joe has. What I'm gonna do here, Joe, is I'm gonna post this, and then I'm gonna send you the link to the StreamYard. And if you wanted to come on today, we still have well over an hour of the show. If you wanted to come on and provide us with any information that you think that might be helpful, we would really appreciate that. Let me go through these. Hold on. Before I do that, let me put my email address here. Joe, if you could, let's see, Eric. Let's see, spelling it wrong. At email. Man, I just having a brain freeze here. Okay, Joe, if you would send me your email address to that email address that I just posted in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll copy the link here for the show, and I'll send it to you, and then you can come right on. Let me hide this so I can copy that to the clipboard real quick. Okay, so let's real quick my conclusions that I drew up for this amateurish slideshow here. Number one, the shroud is supported through Scripture. Sacred Scripture says that there was something there left in the tomb. What was left there? It's not concise. It's not very definitive, but at least we know that there were two separate cloths there, the linen cloth that he was buried in and the face covering that covered his face. Number two, we know that it's the shroud, the markings that are on the shroud itself that appear are consistent with what the passion that Christ went through, the crucifixion, the flogging, the crown of thorns, the marks in the hand, the feet, and the spear thrust to the side. Then you have the fact that, this is what we were just talking about. There's no known processes right now. We don't know of any process to create something like this, let alone back in the Middle Ages. Now, I'm not saying that that automatically makes the shroud of divine origin, but it gives you a pretty good indication that there's something special going on here. Their historical evidence for the shroud is overwhelming. It spans a millennia, and there's all kinds of different spots within that millennia where people are mentioning a shroud appearing with an image on it. You just don't get a piece of linen with an image on it. That just does not happen. People always talk about, the people at that time were ignorant and they didn't know science and they didn't know this and they believed in anything. And there's a lot of truth to that. There was a large percentage of the population at that time was illiterate, and that there was a large percentage of the population that did believe in fables. However, people were smart enough. There was not smart enough people around that could do science at that time, and they could make a determination whether it was painted on there or not. Then there's evidence from the art history that I showed you, that Hungarian prayer manual. There's a picture in there, a painting that was in there that clearly shows the 3/1 herringbone weave that we find in the shroud. There's scientific and physical evidence, overwhelming scientific and physical evidence for the shroud. There we go, Joe. Hold on, Joe. Reply. Here is the link. I just sent it to you, Joe. So if you click on that, we'll bring you on. Okay, so the physical evidence for it, the scientific evidence is overwhelming, and the only one evidence that we have is the carbon-14 dating. This that I'm aware of anyway. This carbon-14 dating from 1988 that gives dates from 1260 to 360 or 390 or whatever it was. But we know that was contaminated with the addition of the repairs that were made to the shroud. So in my opinion, the shroud bears the image of our risen Savior, Jesus Christ. And this is exactly, as I mentioned before in the show, this is exactly something that God would be involved in. He gives us our faith, and Paul writes in Romans that we are saved by our faith. But what we consistently teach here on this show is that it's not a blind faith by any measure or stretch of the imagination. It is a faith that is based in not only logical thought and process and consistent with scripture from the Old Testament, but it's overwhelming manuscript evidence for for Paul's letters, for the gospel accounts. We've got 5,800 manuscripts of the New Testament, for Pete's sake. So it's not a blind faith. It is a logical faith, and it is faith that God has given us enough evidence to where we don't have to wonder of whether or not he exists or his son Jesus Christ is who he said he was. Okay, who here in the panel has any questions? I don't know if you're all going to go DL on me and plead the fifth. Steve always has something. Steve, what are you cooking today? It looks like it looks like you're ready to have yourself some lunch. You're muted. Hold on. I'll unmute you. There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I'm making a steak and potatoes and corn and stuff. But I just want to say what Janice said, man. That is awesome. It is awesome, because that thing about where it goes into the three fibers, or and the image goes into that, and how could they have made that image? I was really skeptical about the Shroud of Turin. I've been a believer 40 years, and I've heard, because I'm Palestinian, so I'm really big on holy sites and relics and that type of stuff, And I've been to all of the stuff in Jerusalem. I'm so skeptical. But when I saw Gary Habermas talking about it, that just blew it up for me. I got to look into this. And I started looking at that stuff, and I thought, dude, this is amazing. This is really amazing. And a great program today. And thank you so much, Janice, for what you shared about that. That is just mind-blowing.
Oh, thank you. I'm humbled. It's so exciting, and people don't have time to spend looking at 2,000 years of information. But now we have it compact, so you can pretty well see what happened, the information, and then enjoy it. But now we have it compact, so you can pretty well see what happened, the information.
We got an echo here.
So you can pretty well see what happened.
Okay. somebody's got a, hold on just a second. Somebody's got a hot mic. Okay, somebody's got a, hold on just a second. Somebody's got a hot mic. Okay, let me turn this up here. Hold on, guys. Hold on. I'll get this figured out. Sorry. Okay, Joe. I see we got Joe in here. Joe, can you let me try muting Joe? Hold on. Let me see if it's Joe. There, Joe. Do you have? Can you hear me, Joe? I just muted you, and the reason why I muted you because we were getting the feedback from your mic. Do you have a speaker set open there on your end also, or do you just have all the sign going through your headpiece? From your mic.
Maybe
Do you have a speaker set open there
let
on
me.
your end?
Okay,
Okay, I just muted you again. Okay, Joe, can you do me a favor? Let's see. I'm not sure. Does anybody have any suggestions on how he fixes that on his end? Okay, Joe. Okay, I'm gonna unmute you again. Let me see if we can fix it there. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, Joe, can you hear me?
yeah, I had two windows open. Sorry, I had two different.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, because that. Yeah, that's what it was. Because if I have the live feed over here on YouTube on also, it just drives us absolutely crazy. Well, welcome to the show, Joe. We appreciate you coming. Okay, and the presentation that Janice gave on that VPA thing, and that was one of the things that just kind of, when you see something like that, you're just like, and I'm not saying this pejoratively, but he's just like, oh my God, what have you given us? With when you can see something like this, and especially having a 3D image of Christ, my goodness. So, Joe, you've been studying this for quite a while. Can you go ahead and tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got involved in all of this? I don't mean to put you on the spot or anything.
Oh, that's right. Actually, I've been at it for 44 years now. I actually have two books. The 800-page one was published last November. And then my first book was originally published in 2011, and I revised and updated that. And that came out in early 2020. And both are available on Amazon. So if people look on Amazon, it's best to put my name, Joseph G. Marino, in the search box, because the old version of the first edition of the Wrapped Up in the Shroud Chronicle of a Passion is still out there, so people could inadvertently order the old one by mistake. But yeah, I started studying the Shroud in 1977 when I was an agnostic, and I saw a book on the Shroud and read it in one sitting. I was fascinated.
What did you say you were? You were an agnostic? Is that what you said you were?
Yeah, at the time that I read my first book on the Shroud. And
okay.
It just blew me away, the evidence. I felt that the evidence that I read in the book was pretty convincing that to show that the Shroud was probably authentic. So I started studying it, and I got slides, gave lectures in St. Louis, my hometown, and I've kept pretty much up to the minute on it for the last 44 years. And I write articles. I have quite a few articles on academia.edu if people want to check that out as well.
Now, do you have any skill set? Like Janice her background was in doing investigations, if I'm not mistaken, forensic investigations. Do you have any skill set in that, or this is just something that you got into as a result of your discovery here?
I kind of consider myself a generalist, but more with a specialty in the C14 area, since I've spent quite a bit of time on that. But I have a degree in theological studies. I was actually in a monastery for quite a while before leaving. But I study all aspects of the Shroud.
You were in the monastery.
I was in a monastery in St. Louis.
Were you in this monastery before you were an agnostic or after you were agnostic?
After.
Okay, so you were agnostic. The shroud is what turns you to Christ, and then you went into the monastery. Is that,
Right.
am I right on that?
Right.
Okay. Now this there's these fiber evidence, the threads that were sewn into the side of the shroud that were cut out. Can you go ahead and tell us about that in more detail? Because I didn't spend a lot of time on it.
Well, my late wife was really the first one to notice it. We had some good high quality pictures of the shroud, and she noticed that there were some irregularities in the cloth, and I had, quite the collection back then, and I still do now. I probably have one of the best top 2 or 3 personal English language collections in the world. And we started doing research and found out that there were a lot of documented and undocumented repairs made on the shroud. And we later found out there was a technique called French invisible reweaving. And during the 1500s, the shroud was owned by the House of Savoy. Margaret of Austria actually owned the cloth. And she had the best weavers in Europe, and they would have been talented enough to do a repair on the shroud. A lot of people tend to say that the poor Clare nuns that repaired the shroud in 1534, 2 years after the fire, did the invisible reweaving, but they would not have been talented enough to do that. They just did the basic patches that they sewed in to fix up the fire damage that had been 2 years before. Sue and I thought that the weavers probably did the invisible repair about 1530, because Margaret had put in her will in 1508 that a piece of the shroud was supposed to go to a special church, and then she died in 1531. And then the fire was in 1532. So we think that the invisible reweave was done about 1530. And when we presented our paper in Orvieto, Italy in 2000, Barry Schwartz, the documenting photographer of the Shroud of Turin research project team, was in attendance, and he asked if he could publish our paper on his site, and we agreed. And it was there that Ray Rogers saw the paper, and he gave Barry a hard time about it, because he said Sue and I were part of the lunatic fringe. And he actually had fibers left over from the 1978 examination from the main part of the cloth. And then he also had...
Roy Rogers had these fibers left over from the shroud itself?
Yeah. He still had some leftover fibers from the 78 examination. And he had also been given some fibers from what was called the Reyes sample, which had been taken in 1973. It's called the Reyes sample because it was Dr. Gilbert Reyes. He was a Belgian textile expert, and he was given a piece to examine. And Ray Rogers also had some of the Reyes threads. So Ray told Barry that he could, prove our theory wrong in 5 minutes. And so he went to his microscope and stuff and compared the two and found that they were noticeably different. And Rogers later actually got a leftover piece from the 1988 sample that was not used by the labs. And he found a spliced cotton linen thread, he found a gum, and he found a mordant. He found all the things that would be there if there had been a repair there. And he published a paper in a peer-reviewed article in Thermochemica Acta in January 2005, and unfortunately passed away 2 months later.
Okay. So it was Roy Rogers who went in and finally said, okay, you lunatics, you're saying that and just what you let me back up here. You got these pictures from Barry Schwartz, and you and your wife examined these pictures, and by just examining these pictures, you were able to determine that there was something wrong with the fibers, or there was something different in the fibers.
Yeah, that's how it started. Yeah, Sue thought that there were some evidences of irregular threads in there. And then we started just doing more, looking at more photographs and doing historical research and writing several more papers. And then Ray Rogers jumped into the fray and did his research and did chemical research, compared the main part of the cloth, the samples from there, with the samples from the C14 area, found that they were different. Other researchers also found differences. There are lots of chemical differences. And if you look at the evidence, it's very compelling that the reason the dating is off is because they dated a repaired sample and not an original sample from the shroud.
Can you tell us if Roy Rogers was a believing Christian or not, or do you know?
He was. I would say he was a nominal Episcopalian. He didn't advertise it much, but he and I know Barry very well. I never met Ray Rogers, but I know Barry very well, and so I get a lot of good information from Barry. So Ray, I would say he was a nominal Episcopalian.
Okay, so his desire to prove that this was the burial cloth of Christ, you wouldn't say that was religiously motivated.
No,
it was more for the science. Is what he
absolutely. It was absolutely for the scientific challenge involved.
Okay, because I think I remember watching a YouTube video where he was making a big complaint about a couple that were bothering him with evidence that they thought, and I didn't realize it was you. And that when he went in there, and he had cancer at the time when you notified him. Am I correct on that?
He did. He was diagnosed as early as about 2001, I believe, and the doctor gave him about 6 months to live. And there was another book written by a friend of mine that kind of got his dander up, and I think his interest in the shroud kept him alive another 4 years.
Wow, that's amazing. That's just absolutely amazing. Okay, so when you and your wife are looking at these pictures and you're doing additional research with it, do you belong to like a society, or is there like some type of Illuminati society with the Shroud of Turin folks? Mm-hmm. that I'm not saying you're Illuminati, but I mean, is there some type of Shroud society out there? When Janice contacted me this morning and said that, well, I spoke at a Shroud conference, and I'm thinking, they have these things here in the United States. I would think that they would be, if they were going to have a conference on the Shroud, they would have them in Turin, Italy or something, and not here in the United States.
All over the world. I've been to about 10 or 11 all over the world. There's been about 5 in North America since 2008, I think. There's going to be a mini one in Washington, D.C. In October this year, and then there's going to be a larger one, 2 or 3 day conference in Washington, D.C., probably at the Museum of the Bible in 2022. But yeah, I mean, there's organizations for that study the shroud, and then there's just a lot of individuals that are interested and aren't affiliated with anybody. But I and Janice belong to a group called the Shroud Science Group, which has been going since 2003. There's between about 100 and 125 scientists and researchers from all over the world, and one has to be recommended by another member to be able to join. But we discuss scientific and also theological and historical aspects of the shroud on this internet group.
Okay, now Gary Powell just pointed out that this Museum of the Bible is awesome. This is something that's been recently opened in Washington, D.C. I took as a teacher, I'm a teacher, full disclosure. I'm an American history teacher. And one thing that I do is I take kids to Washington, D.C. We didn't go last year because of COVID, but for the last 10 years, we've been going to Washington, D.C. And toured, we go up there 3-4 days. And the Museum of the Bible was not open. So I'm assuming this just opened here recently. Am I correct on that? Do you know?
I think
or maybe
it's
Gary.
open now, and there's going to be a Shroud exhibition that's going to open, I think, February 22nd next year.
Okay.
Most of the museums in the government museums in DC are still closed because of COVID, but this is a private organization, and I do believe, I think it is open at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, it opened. Okay. So Guy says, oh, it opened in 2017. Really? I wonder why I haven't put that on our itinerary. We're going to have to do that next year. I think we're going to go. We're not going again this year, but we might be going next year. I have to work that out. At Eric Smith, was Barry Jewish? Yes, Barry Schwartz is Jewish. I'm not sure if he's Jewish now.
Yeah,
he's still
not a Christian and not a Messianic Jew. He's
okay.
Jewish by birth and believes just on the scientific evidence that the shroud wrapped the historical Jesus.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, Joe. This would be a great question for you. Do you believe that the Shroud of Turin is the actual burial cloth of Christ?
Do I? Oh, absolutely. There's nothing more sure of. I'm not. It's the thing I'm most positive about anything in the world, practically. I'm absolutely convinced.
Okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you know what? I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you give me the top 5 evidences of the shroud that would, or if you want to give me 10, I don't care. I mean, what convinces you? And I'm convinced of it, but because of the fiber issue. I mean, that those fibers you just can't do that. You just cannot reproduce that. And that would be something that God would be involved in. The VP8 imagery analyst, I saw that, I don't know how many years ago, and that just kind of blew me away. So I really, when they came out with the carbon-14 dates back in 1988, I was like, I thought it was. I wanted to believe it, but I thought, okay, well, if it's not, it's not. I'm still, grounded in my faith. I still believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I'm good with that. But when these evidences came out here recently that you have the recent contamination there, that really got me excited. So, okay. So what convinces you that this is the Shroud of God?
Yeah, well, you've actually named a couple of them. I would say the superficiality. It's only on the top several thousandths of an inch of the fibers, which is impossible to duplicate. The three-dimensionality. There's no other 2D photo in the world that you can put into the VP8 and get 3D information. The photo negativity. Why would any forger even do it that way, even if he knew about it? Photography wasn't even invented till the 1860s, and we know the shroud's been around since the 1350s. If you're going to do a forgery, you're going to try to fool people, and why would you do it in a way that makes it harder to see the image? So those are the 3 of them. And then the fact that people often say, well, how do we know it's not another crucifixion victim? Well, how many crucifixion victims do you know that had a cap of thorns, pierced in the side, and were scourged? I mean, Jesus is the only person that shroud could have wrapped. I mean, even though the Romans crucified thousands of people, we don't have any other full burial shrouds. We got a portion of a shroud that was found in Jerusalem in 2000. Usually, when the body was in a shroud, the decomposition of the body would end up destroying the cloth. So we have, and the blood stains seem to indicate that the body left the shroud without disturbing the blood stains. So to me, that points toward basically a supernatural exit.
Can you explain that? The body left the shroud without disturbing the blood stain.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
If you got a bloody wound and you wrap a cloth around it, and then you take the cloth off the wound, it's going to smudge and smear it. But on the shroud, it's sort of like you can see what the blood stain looked like before the shroud was even put on it. And somehow the body came out of the shroud without disturbing the blood stains. So it was almost like the body, for lack of a better word, dematerialized. And that scientific experiment that the Italian scientists did, where they used ultraviolet excimer laser, and they zapped a control piece of linen for 1/40 billionth of a second, and they were able to duplicate on a minute scale the color and penetration of the shroud image. But there's not enough energy in the world to be able to do a full front and back image using that method. So that's another indication to me that this was a short-term burst of radiation. I'm glad you showed that image from Hiroshima. I think that it is a telling image, and it can leave that image, that Hiroshima image is sort of like a negative of that person that was, blown up by the forces of the bomb. So to me, everything seems to point to a controlled supernatural dematerialization of the body in a split second.
I've never heard that before. That's that's amazing. Wow, that is amazing. Now, I will tell you the Hiroshima photograph that I put up there. That was our friend John Isaac's idea. He sent that to me last night. Said, "Oh," because I sent him the PowerPoint that I made yesterday. I said, "You guys go ahead and critique that. Tell me what I need to fix. Tell me what I could, And John came back and said, "You might want to include this photograph of the Hiroshima thing." But even that does not demonstrate the amount, what you're saying, even that does not demonstrate the amount of energy that would be necessary in order to get an entire body image on the cloth itself.
Yeah. A lot of the scientists say, "Oh, well, it couldn't have been a nuclear release of any kind because it would have, blown all of Jerusalem up." But the key, I think, for me is, God can do anything He wants. If He wants to control it to the degree that the blast singed the cloth enough to leave an image behind, and help the cloth to be preserved down through almost 2,000 years, and save for an age that we're more attuned to images than we are words nowadays. I think it's the shroud's just a perfect antidote for the doubting Thomases of today.
Okay. Well, I agree. I mean, that if God was going to give us evidence of who Christ was and what He did, this would be a great way to do that. Hey, we got a question here we got two questions. We got a question from Guy, and then we got one here from Janine. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Miss Miller. Wouldn't the blood have all been dried? He is talking like the blood would still be wet and smearable. Do you have a response to that question? I mean, if after 3 days, would all of the blood have been dried by then during the resurrection?
Yeah, but the whatever the mechanism was to blast it on there would have probably just captured the blood wounds as they were at the time, and they are basically dry. People were surprised that the blood wasn't brown or black, because typically that's what happens to old blood. But one of the scientists found out that torture victims, when they're tortured badly and stuff, bilirubin gets released in the bloodstream and keeps the blood color more red than it would normally be. But I mean, yeah, I would say
what would you say gets released into the bloodstream? What is it? It's a chemical. It's something that your body generates.
Chemical called bilirubin.
Okay.
And that helps to keep the blood redder than it would normally be.
And that's when that your body generates this, when your body's put under large amounts of stress, like being tortured or something like that. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean,
okay, we had another. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that when it was brought to the tomb, the blood wounds probably would have been somewhat moist for a while. But I would say by the time of the resurrection, they probably would have been pretty much all completely dried.
Okay. We had another question here by Guy Powell. Do you know Guy Powell?
I don't.
Okay. Guy writes, okay. Okay, the burial cloth and as a witness to the resurrection. But how could a roughly 175-pound man be lifted onto the cloth without, and then he goes on to say, without, let's see here, without any blood smudges? Granted, Mary washed the body, but it still had to be leaking blood and therefore should have led to blood smudges on the back of the shroud. Does that question make sense to you?
I'm not sure, but I mean, again, going back to my previous comment, I think when the resurrection happened, it left the blood stains exactly as they were, and when he exited the cloth, that's what they would have looked like without unwrapping the shroud, and they didn't smear when he exited the cloth.
Okay. Yeah, I think what he's asking here is, okay, even after Jesus is brought down from the cross, and even after you go through this ceremonial cleansing of the body, that the blood in a large part would have been already cleaned off. So, well, okay, I see what's happening here. Well, the blood was from what I could see, and what I would think is that your question is pre-resurrection and not post-resurrection. Yeah, then that's what we're trying to get to here, Guy. Guy asks us, his question deals with the pre-resurrection. So if the body is clean and you lay it on the cloth, there's still going to be blood draining from the body. That would, because they had to hurry up and get the body buried because it was late afternoon before the Sabbath, and they couldn't touch something that was unclean during Sabbath. So I would think that those wounds were still open and still leaking, for lack of a better term, blood out.
And can you still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you, Janice. Go ahead.
The blood was put down first, and then the image, which is the dehydrated cellulose of the fibrils of the linen.
Right. And that's
so what does that mean? I'm not following. What does that mean?
Well, you're saying that Jesus, the man of the shroud, was taken down from the cross, the crucifix, and in the tomb, placed on the linen, like you described, where the body was laid on the linen, and then the linen was brought over the head down to the feet. Mm-hmm. And any blood then could have been put on the linen. But at the time of the force of energy that on the fibrils caused them to be dehydrated, that's part of the image of the embedded force of the body, of the blood and body fluids that were still there.
Okay, so what we're just trying to figure out though is did the blood that is on the shroud get there after the body was cleaned? I'm not understanding what Gary, by lifting the heavy body. Okay, and let me just point what Gary's saying here. Okay, Gary, let's see here. By lifting a heavy body pre-resurrection would lead to smudges on the cloth. Depends on who's lifting the body. I mean, you can lift, two people can lift up a body and lay it down without smudging or moving the body around. If you're laying the cloth out on the slab, or if you're in the tomb itself and then covering it up, I don't know. Go ahead.
It should also be pointed out, I think, that experts don't agree whether the body was actually washed or not, which would play a factor in that as well.
Well, doesn't it say well, yeah, they came back to wash the body, didn't they? That's what they came back on the third day.
Well, not necessarily. Well, I mean, they came back to complete. The women came back on Sunday morning to complete all of the rituals because everything was rushed on Friday.
Okay.
So if they had washed the body, they probably would have done that sooner rather than later.
All right. Well, I actually have another question regarding the carbon dating. I've been having internet problems cutting in and out, but Eric, you mentioned the carbon dating. Okay, I recall reading or seeing something out on the History Channel that the carbon dating was flawed because there was a fire in one of the monasteries, and it actually melted the lead and the smoke and the ashes during the time of the fire, and that's what the carbon dating is dated back to, something like that. Any comment on that?
When you're carbon date, you can have carbon absorbed into the thread itself from a recent fire. This is true, but when you're dating the artifact itself, I don't think that can contaminate it to the point where it's going to throw off because you're talking about getting a large amount of recent carbon in there from carbon-14. When a fire burns, it doesn't put off carbon-14. It burns carbon-12. I think it's carbon-12 is what is put off. I'm willing to be wrong on that, but I don't think that a fire itself could contaminate it. But what we were looking at, and I think Joel will explain here, that the sample that they tested was from the corner of the shroud that had been repaired using recent flax, and it was threaded into the shroud itself, and that's what they tested when they went to repair it. It wasn't part of the original cloth. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a popular theory among a lot of the major scientists that the fire skewed the dates. There was several Russian scientists that believe that. There's a lot of American scientists that believe that. The consensus seems to be that fire would not skew the amount of carbon-14, but a more popular theory is that neutron radiation from the sort of like the quote the controlled nuclear blast might have thrown the carbon-14 off. That's still a very popular theory.
So you're saying that the resurrection itself, this nuclear or radiated event, is what added carbon to it?
Yeah, it would have changed. It would have added, I think, they say nitrogen or something, which would have been then converted to extra carbon-14. It gets very.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right, because in order to create carbon-14, you have to have a ray from nuclear fusion. I mean, this is how carbon-14 is created in our upper atmospheres. The sun's rays are hitting, nitrogen-14 atoms, or they're hitting an atom, and then it's making it a radioactive isotope, and then that radioactive isotope falls to the earth. It's absorbed by plants. Animals eat the plants. They get carbon-14, and then it decays into nitrogen-14. So if that nuclear reaction itself hit, what does it hit? Carbon-12 and adds 2 protons or 2 2 electrons. Is that how that would work? Is that a theory that you're saying?
My friend Mark Antonacci from St. Louis has written a book called "Test the Shroud at the Atomic and Molecular Levels," and he goes into great detail about the protons and neutrons, and he's a big proponent of that theory. His book's available on Amazon if people want to check that out too. "Test the Shroud at the Atomic and Molecular Levels," Mark Antonacci.
Okay, but I'm thinking the most plausible theory would be when they went to repair it, that those recent threads that they had sewn into the shroud itself would skew the dates immensely.
Well, it's the simplest explanation, and it makes sense given that the cloth was cut in that corner and actually several other corners. And when linen is cut on, if you don't repair it, it frays, and they should not have taken just one sample from one bad area. They originally were supposed to take samples from several areas. And that was one of the many protocols that they broke, that they didn't follow. And that's all documented in my book. They had a long meeting in Turin in 1986 that covered 3 days. And then when it came time to cut the sample, it's like they had forgotten everything that they had talked about at the meeting, and they argued for an hour and a half where they would take the sample from the day they took it. And the politics and egos and agendas, it's mind-boggling. That's why I ended up with 800 pages.
Would you say, what was the last part you said, that the politics did what now?
There was just a lot of politics, egos, and agendas involved, by the people involved in the testing. The labs wanted to showcase the AMS method of C14, which was only about 11 years old at the time. And then after the C14 dating results were announced, the AMS industry became a multi-billion-dollar industry very quickly.
So you're saying that politics got involved in dating the shroud? Are you kidding me? Yeah, people's personal agendas are getting in the way of the truth. Oh my goodness! Say it's not so. Okay, I had a question up here. From RN. Let me put it up here on the screen if you can see it. Has Joe talked about the history of the face cloth called the Sudarium of Oviedo? Oviedo. It sounds very Italian, but it's Spanish, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I've got quite a bit of literature on that. I keep everything on that as well because it's so closely tied to the shroud. It's known to be in Spain since about 619. Some of the researchers, shroud researchers, have studied both cloths, and they notice a lot of similarities between the bloodstains on the Shroud of Turin and the bloodstains on the Sudarium. Now, the Sudarium does not have a facial image; it only has bloodstains. But there seems to be a close match. And what's interesting about the Sudarium, if they did wrap the same man, that's another indication that the C14 dating is wrong, because we know that it's been in Spain since 619. And if it did wrap the same, if both cloths were used on the same man and the Oviedo cloth dates to 619, well, then the 1260 to 1390 is off by at least 700 years right there. So Shroud.com has a lot of information on the Sidarium as well. There's a wonderful search engine there. You can spend your whole life there. When you go to the search window, if you put in Sidarium of Oviedo, you'll get a million hits.
Now, there's two things about the Sidarium, the blood type. The blood types match.
Yeah, they're both AB.
Okay, and one of the evidences that I think I put in my slideshow today was that it was AB positive, and only 3% of the population has AB positive blood.
I've heard conflicting remarks about whether it was positive or negative, so I'm not sure it's clear which one it is, but AB as a type, as a general type, is very rare, and most the Jewish people were generally AB.
Okay, and Steve, I see your hand there. Just give me a second. I had another question about the cloth. Now it says that there's similarities between the cloth and the shroud as far as what, where the puncture marks are or where they would be located, and if that's true, how do they make that determination if these two artifacts have not been brought, unless they have been brought together and comparisons have been made?
They've done simulations of how the Sidarium of Oviedo would have been wrapped. So they use replicas of the cloth, and then determine that if the face cloth was used, wrapped around a certain way, and then it's unfolded and you compare it to the blood stains on the shroud, there seems to be an accurate anatomical match.
Okay. Steve, our brother Steve here from California, who just got done eating a big plate full of steak and potatoes, has a question. Go ahead, Steve.
Actually, I just got three really fast questions. Number one, about the coins. Is that consistent with what you're saying about the radiation or the explosion that happened in order to get the image onto the shroud? Would that be what it would take also to get the image of the coins onto the shroud? Then number two, about the I heard this guy in Israel, and he said that he had actually found some of the blood of Christ through fissures in the temple, in the Mount Calvary, where they think Calvary happened. And one thing he said, and I don't know, but I think it was Ron Wyatt or one of those. He said that that there's 4 to 6 chromosomes in each person, because 23 from the mom, 23 from the dad. And he says that, but with this blood, there was only 23 because it only came from the mother. And so, is there anything about that? And then the third question, just a simple question: do you think that the shroud is scientific proof of the resurrection?
Okay. Okay. So on the coins on the eyes, yeah, I think if coins were there, the radiation event would depict them as they are perceived. Now, my friend Barry does not think that the coins are there. And my argument to him is, well, if you've got a shroud image that you don't know how it got there in the first place, his reasoning is that the weave of the cloth is such that if there were coins there, you wouldn't be able to discern the letters. But if you've got an image that you can't explain, why do you need to get over rational about how you would be able to see letters or not? So if the whole image is unexplained, why do you have to get rational about the weave of the cloth and that you wouldn't be able to discern the image? If God wants to leave Pontius Pilate coins on the eyes, he can do that. even if it contradicts normal, the normal physics or whatever. So I think there's, if there's not a Pontius Pilate coin there, that's one of the world's biggest coincidences, considering there's like 6 or 7 coins that have that misspelled C on it that we see on the blow up of the right eye area. So I don't think it's definite, but I think it's a good possibility personally. The Ron Wyatt thing, he came up with some pretty amazing claims, but he never published anything in peer-reviewed journals and stuff. So quite frankly, he's not taken seriously. I'm not saying he's 100% wrong on everything, but I think a lot of his stuff is questionable at best. And then can't read my writing on the third one.
The scientific proof of the resurrection. He asked you about the scientific proof.
Well, I always say you can't prove 100% that it wrapped Jesus. I think you can get awful close. I think, and that's probably a good thing, because people are worried about the faith aspect, and you say, well, if that proves the resurrection, that takes away faith. But I think it leaves a little room for faith, because we don't have a DNA profile of Jesus, so we can't match it exactly. I think you get as close to scientific proof without getting to 100% as you're ever going to get.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I actually got a question on the coin thing. So I always thought coins on the eyes was like a pagan thing to bribe, the ferryman across the river Styx to take you into the underworld. Why? I mean, if that's true, right? Then why would coins be on the eyes of a Jewish dead man? You know what I mean?
Because the eyes don't close after the body dies. Your eyes stay open. They don't.
Okay.
They don't.
So
mortuary science. People who practice mortuary, they sew the eyes shut, the eyelids shut today. Right. I might be wrong. Am I wrong on that, Joe? Am I wrong on that?
There are indications that some Jews were buried with coins on the eyes. So I wouldn't say it was a universal Jewish custom, but it was a custom done with some Jews. So it's possible. Now, one question I do have is whether they would have used a Roman coin as opposed to a Jewish coin. But, it's one of those things where, if the evidence shows it's there even if it, contradicts our sensibilities about it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because that would be, I don't know if that would be considered a defilement of the body if you used a Roman coin as opposed to one of the, because I mean, this is where the money changers made their money, is that you would have to change Roman currency for Jewish currency. But I guess you would, if you don't have any Jewish currency, I mean, you guess you would have to use what you have or have available. But I'd never considered that would be considered pagan, or not necessarily pagan, but a defilement. It's something.
Another question for our Muslim listeners. Was there any evidence of the aloe vera herbs and spices that cured death by crucifixion that we hear all the time from the Muslims, that's why he walked out of the tomb alive? So any evidence of that? And I'm joking, by the way. I'm looking at his face like, what is this guy talking about?
Because Joe, I don't think Joe and Janice quite understand the title. The name of the show is the Cross and the Crescent Discussion Group, and we spend majority of our time discussing the issues and the differences between Christianity and Islam, proofs for each of those, and arguments against those. So, and one of the arguments that a very popular Islamic apologist has made, I believe it's Shabir Ali has made. Am I right on this, Rad? Is the Shabir Ali has made this?
He made it. A bunch of others have. I mean, it's pretty much ridiculous.
Doctor.
Okay. Well, Dr. Shabir Ali has made the argument that the reason why they brought herbs and spices, the women did, and aloe vera, is to rub that into the wounds of Jesus as he was healing from the crucifixion. And they say, and the scary thing is that they say this with a complete straight face. And that's what yeah, and that's what it's scary.
So,
But I don't think Joe is going to comment on the aloe vera. You're not going to comment on the aloe vera
Well,
piece, are you?
there's an Italian scientist that wrote a article on the myrrh and aloes that you can find on shroud.com. Dr. Baima Bologna is his name, Bollonne. That's how you spell his last name. He has an article about the myrrh and aloes. He seemed to have found more of that than the stirp people found, and I'm not sure why that is, but I think it's unlikely to the point that I think it's impossible to think that with all the wounds that Jesus suffered, that they could have just used any sort of medicine and got him well again. I mean, he was tortured unmercifully, and it makes more sense to use Occam's razor and say, yeah, he died from that, and he wasn't going to be revived.
Well, the reason why they come up with all of these, I call them excuses of desperation, but theories or explanations, is because in the Quran it clearly states in 4:157 that Jesus did not die, and he was not crucified. And if it says it in the Quran, then of course the Quran being true, the absolute word of God, that and God not making mistakes, then why, if you have to have some type of apologetic there or some type of rescuing device of, well, why does the Bible say that the women brought these spices and herbs there when the rest of the Gospels clearly state that Jesus was in fact crucified and did in fact die? And this is just one of the developed apologetics that Islam has come up with, Muslims come up with when trying to denigrate, or not necessarily denigrate, but prove that the crucifixion didn't happen. That's prove that Jesus Christ was never crucified or never died on a cross.
Do you mind if I ask?
Okay. No, we do, Isa. Where have you been?
I'm here. I just running around.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here.
This is our friend here, Isa. Isa, go on ahead.
Hi, Joe. Mr. Joe. It's a pleasure to meet you. So my question is kind of like a dual question. So the second question is kind of contingent on the first. So we've seen particularly in Catholicism, there are a lot of relics. Relics are a big thing. Like these saints' relics are super important. And certain people find them to be dubious. They say, well, they're false. They're just it's the church basically fabricating these relics in order to get people's faith motivated, right? And certain elements could be things like the true cross. If you take all the pieces of the true cross and put them together, it's like a stadium of the true cross. Like you could make a stadium for all the little pieces of the true cross combined together. Some people have claimed, like during the Crusades, that they found the spear of Longinus. There are all these types of relics. So looking at this type of situation, the Shroud of Turin might fit into this type of dialogue of this could be another fabric. If it is, if those relics are fabricated, I'm not saying they are or they're not. Assuming if someone stated that they were fabricated, how could we prove that the Shroud of Turin, among other relics that are fabricated, is legitimate? I think it first surfaced in medieval France, if that's correct. How would we prove that? And I think the second part of the question is, if let's say we could say this is a legitimate relic of this situation. I think this is a hard question. How do we say that this was the shroud of Jesus? Like, why not any other Jewish person that was found in a tomb? Like, how do we know that this shroud belonged to Jesus? So those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fake relics, and it has to be admitted that the 14th century was a prominent time for relics during the time that the shroud historically surfaced. But I think the shroud's in a class by itself. I don't I do pay attention to the Sudarium of Oviedo because I think there's good evidence for that. I don't think you can prove 100% that the shroud is real, but based on the evidence, I think you can come close. And the reason, maybe you weren't here when I mentioned a few minutes ago, the reason I think it's Jesus as opposed to anybody else is kind of a two-part answer, twofold aspect, is that the man on the shroud shows evidence of a cap of thorns, actually, not a crown of thorns, piercing in the side, and a severe scourging. And you have an intact shroud. The shroud's the only intact burial cloth with a full front and back image. It's totally unique. We have portions of other shrouds, but most of them are decayed due to the decomposition of the body. So, and there's other scientific evidence that the body somehow left the shroud, possibly through some sort of radiation event, which would match to what people know as the crucifixion. So just to me it's a pile of evidence that says the wounds match. All the indications are that it's totally unique, and it might have been a radiation event of some kind. And so it's logical, I think, to make the conclusion that it's most likely, and not 100%, but it's most likely that it wrapped the historical Jesus of Nazareth.
Can I add something to that, Joe, if you don't mind? Because Isa, how do you know it could not have just been any other Jew that had been crucified in first century Jerusalem at this time? And that's a legitimate question, because on the shroud, you have the process of crucifixion. You have the scourging, and that's what you expect to find on a body that was going through the process of crucifixion, because they normally start off with scourging them. The second thing is you have the hole marks in the hand or in the wrists, and this is what you would expect to find. And you also have the hole marks in the feet, which is you expect to find from the process of crucifixion. But what you wouldn't expect to find is you would not expect to find all those puncture marks on the head from where it is described in the Gospels that Jesus was given a crown of thorns. You wouldn't expect that to be on every single person who was crucified in Jerusalem. And the second thing you wouldn't expect to find is you wouldn't expect to find a spear mark where somebody was stabbed through the side after or during the crucifixion. You would expect to find that the legs have been broken.
Right.
And we find the spear mark, and we also find that the legs were not broken. So you have three additional points of congruence here towards it being Jesus Christ as described in the Gospels, as opposed to just any normal run-of-the-mill everyday crucifixion from that time period.
Yeah, and I'll make one more point about the scourging.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
People that were going to be crucified, if they were scourged, they were only lightly scourged because you wanted the person to die the cruelest death possible. So you only normally lightly scourge them. Now, the man on the shroud is severely scourged and crucified. But then when you look at the Gospels, you find out that Pilate had Jesus severely scourged with the hope that when the people saw him, they would feel sorry for him and let him go, but it didn't work. They still wanted him crucified. So that's another specific point of congruence that it was Jesus. That wouldn't have happened to a normal person.
If somebody was be scourged and you say a quote unquote light scourging, what would, I mean, do you know what that would mean, Joe? I mean, do we have any type of record of people being lightly scourged? I mean, if there's such a thing as being, I mean, a beating is a beating as far as I'm concerned, whether it's light or severe. But I mean, is there any description out there that you would have a light one?
Yeah, I mean, there were gradations. I mean, because some people could literally die under the scourge. And another deterrent for the Roman soldiers was if someone's supposed to be crucified and you scourge them and the person died, the soldier that did the scourging would die. So you had to be darn sure you did it right. But yeah, I mean, there's references in the literature to the types of punishments. There's whole books on crucifixion. Martin Hengel has a classic book on crucifixion. People have to do some historical research to really dig into the details.
Okay. All right, folks, we got just a couple minutes left today.
Seconds.
Oh, there's my Blog Talk Radio lady. 90 seconds left. I want to thank Joe and Janice for coming today and commenting and giving us their expertise on this. God love you guys for what you do. It's just absolutely amazing topic. And I'm going to tell you right now, the Andy from New Mexico emailed me and said that he wanted to come on, but he couldn't come on today because he had, I don't know, some type of church meeting that he had to go to, putting God first before the show. I mean, that's unbelievable. But we're going to have him on next week. So if you, Joe and Janice, if you guys want to come back next week, you know what I think would be really cool is if you guys had some type of conversation going about the depth that goes into all of these arguments. And, I don't want to say, dazzles, with your brilliance or anything, but I'm sure that the depth that we could go into all of this would just is, we could really take a deep dive on that. So if you guys want to do that, just email me and we'll get this set up for next Sunday, because we're definitely going to have Andy on. And if you guys want to come also, we most certainly would love to have you. I want to get on one last piece of business here that Rad was going to bring up. Rad, are you there? That you want to
10 seconds.
And by the way, this isn't just for your information. This isn't one of our commercials that Rad is putting together. That gets everybody all wound up. Did that lady come back, or did she notify you some way?
It's like I got. Well, okay. So here's the thing. I'll post the link. Here's her profile. She's in Uganda. She runs a orphanage in Uganda for children from war and suffering from HIV and all kinds of fun stuff that happens over in that part of the world. So you can check out our profile, but basically it's kind of like a subsistence, a farming kind of community kind of thing. But their water pump that they use for their well is totally burned out and costs $280 to get it replaced. I just sent her $150. I'll give you guys all the details in our Skype channel, also on Facebook. But no, you can go check out. She's legit. You know what I mean? But yeah, she was going to come on. She was going to explain it. But I screwed up. I wanted to be earlier, but I had a bunch of stuff to do, like sleep from the cold medicine. And yeah, so I got here late. But anyway, it's like midnight there. She had to go to bed, so she couldn't come on. But yeah, I'll send you guys all the details.
Sure.
Skype
Okay, guys, I just posted her Facebook information in chat there. So if you want to, send her, and she has a way to contribute on her Facebook page. Am I correct on that?
No, we went through a program. It was pretty cool. It's called World Remit. It was actually really easier than PayPal or anything like that. But I just sent her $150. Like I said, I'll post all the information that you will need if you go through this method. We can send her $25, whatever, get her up to the goal, because evidently they're having a problem now with water, because the well water, they can't get the well water out, so they got to go through alternate means for like 57 children, that's doing it. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, you go to her Facebook page, you check it out. She's doing wonderful work with these children. I mean, just really amazing stuff. I followed her like a couple of years ago, or friended her, or she friended me, or whatever, a couple of years ago, and just had light contact and stuff. But then I noticed she mentioned that the well water pump broke, and she posted pictures on it. Want to know if anybody could fix it, and evidently, no, it can't be fixed, because they want to sell her a new one. But anyway, so I was like, let me see if we can help you out.
and this is one of the things that I always run into is people running scams on Facebook. Send us money,
Steve.
please. And then when you dig into it, they're scammers. But you're saying that this lady is legit or does exist. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not doubting that. I'm just telling you the psyche that people have on this. They're always reluctant to give money to scammers. But I mean,
right, like I said, I mean, I wouldn't ask. Dude, not only would I not have asked, I would not have just sent $150. You know what I mean? If I was suspicious. No, you look. I mean, no. Her Facebook page is always updated with stuff, and you know what I mean. She's a real person. Not somewhere. And besides, it's Uganda, not Nigeria, which of course is where my rich uncle lives, and I still haven't gotten that money from him. But yeah, like I said, $50, whatever, 25. I don't know. We get enough. Get her up to the $280 to get that water pump. Because that's kind of important.
Well, I'm sure that people, we've had all kinds of people in chat today, and some godly people, some kindly people that we have there. So I'm sure that she's going to be. She'll get what she needs. I'll get on there and send her some my way myself. Okay, everybody. Once again, we got to close this out. We're past due. And the reason why I got to condense this down is because on the Blog Talk Radio, you can only go so long. And the last 2 episodes on the Blog Talk station itself, they're not able to compress the MP3 file enough or whatever, and it has the recording's not available. So. I got to cut this off. Joe, Janice, again, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. Ista, Rad, DL, John, Chris. Who else was here today? I wrote you guys down. John's still here. Is John still here? John's still here. Yep, John. And Steve was here. So thank you all for coming. And everybody in chat, again, thank you for coming. And we will see you next week on the real interfaith dialogue, as we call it on Blog Talk Radio and the Crescent discussion group. God bless y'all. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.